In September 2003, a devastating crisis unfolded in Maryland. Authorities drew a half-mile radius circle around the affected area. Every ash tree inside that zone had to be cut down and destroyed. Residents watched as even healthy-looking trees were removed. The sound of chainsaws echoed from morning until evening. One tree fell, then another, followed by an entire row. Within just a few months, around 1,100 trees had been cut down. In the following years, the number in Maryland surpassed 40,000. What the authorities were doing was not illegal. They were forced to take these measures to eliminate larvae that were only a few millimeters long. For the next 2 years, the plan appeared to work. But by 2006, the insects were discovered again, and the affected area had grown tenfold. Despite using the most extreme control measures and spending $12.5 billion, their numbers continued to rise. In the end, what helped bring them under control was a bird that few people paid attention to, and an invasive species no larger than a grain of sand. The story begins in the summer of 2002, when thousands of ash trees around Detroit suddenly began to die. After peeling back the bark, forestry workers discovered a metallic green beetle that had never before been recorded in North America, the emerald ash borer. It is native to China. The beetle is only slightly longer than 1 centimeter, and the way it kills trees is remarkably simple. It lays its eggs deep beneath the bark. Once the larvae hatch, they feed on the tissues that carry water and nutrients through the tree, creating shaped tunnels. This cuts off the tree's supply of water and nutrients. The upper branches die first, the canopy gradually thins, and eventually the entire tree withers. By the time visible symptoms appear, the beetles have often already moved on and begun attacking other trees. By 2007, the emerald ash borer, or EAB, was estimated to have killed more than 53 million trees across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Of course, the beetle did not spread that quickly on its own. Humans helped it travel by moving infested nursery trees, firewood, and lumber. A clear example was the opening incident, which began when 121 infested trees were transported from Michigan to Maryland. By 2026, the beetle had been found in more than 36 U.S. states and 5 Canadian provinces, killing over 100 million trees. The damage was once projected to reach $12.5 billion, but the actual cost has been far higher. The scale of the invasion was enormous. Federal and state authorities used every measure available to them. The transportation of firewood and ashwood across regional boundaries was tightly restricted. Moving a single infested piece of firewood could result in a $25 fine. Trees were injected with imidacloprid, costing between $100 and $300 per tree, with treatments repeated every 2 years. At the height of the crisis, the U.S. Department of Agriculture spent more than $40 million on surveys, quarantines, and outbreak control. At first, officials believed the EAB infestation had been contained, but the beetle continued appearing in new states. But one discovery changed the course of the story. Around 2009, entomologist Andrew Liebhold of the U.S. Forest Service began analyzing bird data collected across the United States. His sources included the Christmas bird count, a nationwide survey that has been running for more than a century, and Cornell University's Project Feeder Watch. At first, he was not studying the emerald ash borer. He simply wanted to understand how bird populations were changing. But the data revealed something unexpected. In the areas where the emerald ash borer was causing the most severe damage to ash forests, 4 bird species were not declining. Instead, their populations were steadily increasing year after year, closely following the same path as the beetle spread. 3 of those species were woodpeckers, while the 4th was the white-breasted nuthatch. In 2013, the findings were published. The paper was written in the cautious language typical of scientific research, but the evidence behind it was anything but insignificant. Something was happening in the forests that had nothing to do with quarantines, federal programs, or insecticide treatments. That same year, entomologist David Capert cut down emerald ash borer-infested ash trees in Michigan and peeled away 1-meter sections of bark to count the larvae. He uncovered a phenomenon that the title of his paper described with unusual honesty: a feast. Not every larva beneath the bark was still alive. In some forests, most of them were already dead. As many as 95% of emerald ash borer larvae had been killed and pulled out of their tunnels. The remaining bark was covered with drill holes, stripped patches, and peck marks left from the outside. The culprit was the woodpecker. If there were two standout hunters in this story, they would be the hairy woodpecker and the downy woodpecker. The hairy woodpecker measures about 18 to 26 centimeters long. With its black and white striped plumage, it is often described as the hammer of eastern hardwood forests, capable of striking tree bark up to 20 times per second. The smaller downy woodpecker, measuring just 14 to 17 centimeters, specializes in foraging on narrow branches and thin bark, reaching parts of the tree that the larger hairy woodpecker cannot search efficiently. For most of the 20th century, both species were common but largely overlooked. Few people saw any reason to study them closely. Then cameras captured what they were actually doing. When hunting emerald ash borers, the birds move slowly along the trunk, stopping frequently. They tilt their heads and use sound and vibrations to detect movement beneath the bark. Once they locate a larval tunnel, they chisel through the weakened bark and use their long, backward barbed tongues to pull the larvae out. The evidence is easy to spot on the tree itself. After each hunt, patches of the dark outer bark are stripped away, exposing large, pale areas about the size of a hand. Foresters call this distinctive sign blonding. It has also become a valuable clue for identifying ash trees infested with emerald ash borers long before the damage is obvious to the naked eye. Field experiments have confirmed just how important this behavior is. In New York, researchers covered part of tree trunks with mesh to keep birds away. No larvae were eaten beneath the covered sections, while 29.6% disappeared from the exposed sections. On the upper portions of the trunk, birds removed 21.1% of the larvae, compared with just 9.9% on the lower sections. In Maryland, where emerald ash borer populations were still relatively low, woodpeckers consumed only 5.8% of the larvae across all exposed trees. But on the 10 trees that attracted the most feeding activity, bird predation accounted for an average of 76.3% of all larval deaths, and on some trees, it reached 100%. In heavily infested forests in Michigan, researchers found that as many as 95% of the larvae in the upper third of the trunk had been killed. They were not merely reduced, they were not partially controlled, they were almost completely eliminated. The bark itself bore the unmistakable evidence of this relentless feeding. Even so, woodpeckers have their limits. They mainly target large larvae and prepupae. They cannot eliminate eggs hidden deep inside bark crevices, nor can they reach every small branch. To block another critical stage of the emerald ash borer's life cycle, the forest needed a second ally, one hundreds of times smaller than a woodpecker. Among the 4 bird species tracked by Andrew Liebhold, the red-bellied woodpecker showed the most dramatic increase, especially during winter. In a 10-year analysis, winter counts of red-bellied woodpeckers increased by about 103.5% after the emerald ash borer arrived. Even after accounting for the species' natural population growth, the increase associated with EAB-infested areas was still estimated at approximately 38.1%. Unlike the hairy woodpecker, which can chisel deep into thick bark, the red-bellied woodpecker usually focuses on easier targets: bark cracks, D-shaped exit holes, and areas where the bark has already begun to peel away. It enlarges these weak spots and pulls out larvae that are feeding just beneath the surface. The 4th species is much smaller. Its scientific name is Sitta carolinensis, better known as the white-breasted nuthatch. It is easy to recognize by its blue-gray back and its unusual habit of climbing headfirst down tree trunks, a posture that allows it to inspect the bark from an angle no other bird can. Winter bird survey data showed that white-breasted nuthatch populations increased by about 63.2% during the decade following the arrival of the emerald ash borer. Even after correcting for long-term population trends, the increase still averaged about 30.3%. Unlike woodpeckers, the white-breasted nuthatch cannot drill through bark. Its skull is not built for that kind of impact, and neither is its bill. But it has a unique advantage. By moving headfirst down the trunk, it examines the bark from a perspective that woodpeckers cannot. It searches the holes already opened by woodpeckers and continues the job they started. It picks out larvae that have been exposed but not yet removed, cleaning up what remains. In many ways, the white-breasted nuthatch works like a subcontractor, taking over the worksite after the woodpeckers have opened it. That is why surface foraging species play such an important role. The bark-drilling birds reduce the larvae hidden deep inside the tree. The surface foragers clean up exposed larvae and those near openings in the bark. Together, they cover nearly the entire vertical surface of the tree, from the canopy down to the base. Very little escapes this two-layer hunting strategy. If you were to cut down a dead ash tree today and peel back the bark in Michigan or Ohio, you would immediately see the evidence. The birds have not eliminated the emerald ash borer, but through a combination of different hunting strategies, they have turned ash trees into an increasingly hostile place for this invasive insect. There is a third predator in this story, one that almost no one ever sees. It is a wasp called Attenicolus caperardi. The species was named after David Caphart, the entomologist who first documented this wasp attacking emerald ash borers in Michigan in 2005. It is native to North America and had been here long before the beetle arrived. Attenicolus is what entomologists call an idiobiont parasitoid wasp. The female locates emerald ash borer larvae by tapping her antennae against the bark and detecting the vibrations the larvae produce as they feed inside their tunnels. When she finds one, she does something that most people would, music, find difficult to believe. She drills. Her ovipositor, a long, needle-like organ that other wasps use to lay eggs, is reinforced with metal-enriched chitin and powered by abdominal muscles. She uses it like an awl, piercing through several inches of solid bark until it reaches the larva beneath. She deposits an egg directly inside the host. The wasp larva hatches within the EAB larva and consumes its host from the inside out. It was born to drill. In the years since Caphart first identified this wasp, Attenicolus has been recorded parasitizing emerald ash borer larvae at significant rates across the upper Midwest, the Northeast, and parts of Ontario. It is a native species that can use several different hosts, but in the emerald ash borer, it has found an almost perfect one. The result is a complete pyramid of predation. Woodpeckers capture larvae hidden inside deep tunnels. Nuthatches and red-bellied woodpeckers patrol the surface. Attenicolus deals with what the birds cannot reach: larvae buried deep within the living tissue behind the bark before they have a chance to emerge. 3 groups of native predators operate within 3 different layers of the tree, sealing off every possible escape route at the same time. Henry Voss's forest is not an isolated case. The same pattern is now appearing across Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and as far as northern New York. You thought that was the end of the story, right? Even with so many natural enemies, this single beetle species still had not disappeared. So scientists began asking a new question. What if they brought in a species from the beetle's own homeland to control it? After all, in China, the emerald ash borer exists at stable levels alongside many other species. The United States decided to bring some of the EAB's natural enemies from Asia. Beginning in 2007, officials released 3 species of stingless parasitoid wasps from China. In 2015, they added a 4th species from the Russian Far East. These tiny wasps can pierce through tree bark and lay their eggs directly in the eggs or larvae of the emerald ash borer, killing the pest from the inside. The scale of this campaign was far greater than most people might imagine. So far, more than 5 million parasitoid wasps have been released into forests. A 2023 report found that this biological control force had spread to more than 360 counties across 31 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces. In 2024 alone, the program continued distributing wasps to 119 different forest sites. More importantly, 3 of the 4 wasp species have successfully established themselves, reproduced on their own, and expanded into new areas. By reducing EAB populations, they are helping protect young ash trees as they begin to grow back. But do not worry. These wasps are not expected to become destructive, invasive species like wild hogs or Burmese pythons. However, nature always finds ways to surprise us with unexpected overlaps. Would you believe that woodpeckers, which are also allies in the fight against EAB, can accidentally interfere with the wasps? In one experiment in Maryland, researchers discovered that when woodpeckers pecked through the bark in search of food, they sometimes unknowingly swallowed EAB larvae that had already been parasitized by the wasps. This interaction shows that natural enemies can work together to reduce beetle populations while also unintentionally competing with one another. There is also one important part of the story that we have overlooked. After hundreds of millions of ash trees died, what happened to all of that wood? For more than a decade, companies in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana salvaged ash trees killed by the beetle. Logs that were still high enough in quality were milled into hardwood flooring, cabinets, furniture, and tool handles. Lower-grade wood was turned into pallets or used as biomass fuel. Some of it also entered the baseball bat industry. Ash wood has long been valued because it is strong, lightweight, and able to withstand repeated impact. Louisville Slugger still produces bat models made from ash, although maple now holds a larger share of the professional baseball market. In Michigan alone, ash salvage operations were once estimated to generate a market worth about $30 million to $50 million per year. That could not make up for the millions of trees that had been lost or the cost of restoring the forests. But it did reduce the amount of wood going to waste and recover some of its economic value. The trees no longer shaded the forest, yet they continued to exist in another form as flooring, hammer handles, pallets, and baseball bats. After more than 20 years of suffering through the emerald ash borer disaster, the ecological scars across North America are finally beginning to heal. In long-established outbreak zones such as Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, signs of natural recovery have started to emerge. Although the devastating invasion once wiped out millions of mature trees, foresters are now documenting the remarkable survival of a resilient group known as lingering ash. Conditions in south-central Michigan offer a particularly encouraging picture of regeneration. On average, each hectare of forest contains more than 4,500 ash seedlings, nearly 2,600 saplings, and about 470 regenerating ash trees continuing to grow. Mortality also declines sharply among younger trees. While 47% of larger overstory trees are still dying, the rate among saplings has fallen to just 7%. Around Detroit, where the first major losses occurred, ash populations have finally moved beyond the point of near total collapse and begun showing signs of recovery. However, scientists remain cautious and do not consider this a complete victory. About one-third of the regenerating trees still show signs of EAB damage. As young trees grow, their bark becomes thicker and their trunks develop more nutrient-rich tissue, making them attractive targets once again and raising the risk of another beetle outbreak. In response to the EAB disaster, ecological management in North America underwent a major shift in thinking. From fighting nature to supporting it, the failure of efforts to completely eradicate the invader led the U.S. Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to remove the federal quarantine in 2020. In its place, authorities adopted an integrated pest management strategy combining the release of biological control wasps, restrictions on the movement of firewood, and, most importantly, the incorporation of indigenous knowledge. One of the most important parts of this new strategy is the connection between modern science and cultural heritage. Black ash has deep spiritual significance for indigenous communities in the United States and Canada because its strong, flexible wood has traditionally been used for basket weaving. Scientists have found that the traditional practice of soaking logs in water is highly effective. It can kill the EAB inside, preserve the quality of the wood, and prevent the pest from being carried back into indigenous communities. At the same time, dead and decaying ash trees, once viewed as debris that needed to be removed immediately, are now recognized as an important part of the ecosystem. In safely managed forests, leaving some standing dead trees provides ideal nesting habitat for birds that feed on insects beneath the bark. Although studies have found a statistical association between the loss of urban trees and changes in public health, this does not prove a direct cause and effect relationship. Even so, maintaining healthy natural bird communities has demonstrated the long-term value of sustainable pest control. In conclusion, the emerald ash borer has not been defeated. Tens of millions of ash trees across North America have been lost forever. Maryland could not preserve all of its green canopy, and neither birds nor parasitoid wasps can bring dead forests back to life. And yet, North American ecosystems are quietly healing and transforming. Native birds have begun recognizing EAB larvae as an abundant food source, helping some bird populations increase during the winter. A study published in 2024 found that on declining ash trees, woodpeckers killed an average of 38.5% of the larvae. Native parasitoid wasps eliminated 15.8%, and introduced wasps contributed another 10.8%. These numbers are still not enough to stop the outbreak completely or restore a healthy green canopy overnight, but the survival of these resilient giants offers a vital source of hope for preserving valuable genetic diversity. The struggle for survival is not over, and nature is still writing the next chapter of its own story. What do you think about nature's ability to heal itself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next fascinating ecological story.